Hi everyone. So this is a collaborative discussion video that I've made with the brothers Hyborian. This is part 2, and part 1 is over on their channel that I'll link to, and urge everyone to go and check them out and flex your mighty thews and pound the subscribe button over there. So we're talking about 2 stories by Robert E. Howard. By This Axe I Rule, a story about King Kull, and The Phoenix on the Sword, a Conan story. So part 1 was mainly about the Kull story. Moving into part 2, it should be focusing mainly on Conan. And yep, that's what it's all about. So the Brothers Hyborian, check them out.
I'm not preaching, I'm just saying you could look at it as Kull's forging the laws for Volusia in the same way, Moses brings down the laws, or you have Hammurabi forging the laws, and later generations of that kingdom are abiding by the laws set for them by Hammurabi. And now Conan, by then Volusia is long gone and the laws are long gone. But if you look at Kull as a forebear to Conan, there's kind of that influence, as Kull does smash a set of stone tablets like Moses and maybe forges new ones. That's what I'm proposing. I don't know, but if Howard had written more Kull, maybe we would have seen new stone tablets. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, and also as readers, we know that civilization is ultimately doomed because It's got Atlantis as part of it. So there's that sense of sort of ultimate fatalism, I suppose, built into the whole thing.
As for now, I'm hoping we can get to Phoenix on the Sword.
Yeah, let's move on to
this story. Is what you commented earlier. The focus moves from the assassins to other characters, and where By This Axe I Rule feels very much in some ways like the end of a road. Like it's the last story in a great series of stories. Phoenix on the Sword is the first is the intro story. It's the first of a great many. And so these are the atmosphere, the sense of the stories are very different. You get a different feeling from them, I would argue. And now, for one thing, as we all three commented, there's really a Brill character missing here. Sadly, I love Brill, but I do think that maybe there should have been someone with, I don't know, a Sword Slayer, come on, or something, because Spear Slayer is such a great title. I'm young, I love titles like that. Spear Slayer. But anyways, the thing is, Grommel still ended up bribing the guards at the doors, but the thing is, we get in the Conan story, at least in the opening, a greater sense of Ascalante as a brilliant strategic mind. Like in the Kull story, I find you don't get it. He does concoct a good deal of the plot, but you don't get as much of the sense that he's an arc manipulator in his own right. Whereas I find in the Phoenix on the Sword part, when he's monologuing to Fafamon, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it, this is what I'm going to accomplish, he might have done some banditry, but I hope you don't mind me saying, but he is a worthy foe to Fafamon and Conan. He is clever. Very clever. He's no fool. And all the nobles he's allied with are dancing to his tune. So, and it's a bit of a pact with the devil for them to have allied with him, because ultimately he plans to, screw them all over. That said, I know he doesn't get to do that, but he comes very, very close to succeeding. And for him to succeed, Fafamon would remain a slave and Conan would be dead. And I don't know if this sounds weird, but it's almost like a three-way war in this story, or like a three-way conflict. You have Ascalante, Conan, and Fafamon pretty much maneuvering against each other in a way. Well, Conan is not fully aware of this immediate threat at first, so it's more Fafamon and Ascalante. But like the dialogue between Ascalante and Fafamon is really good, and I would argue that Fafamon is an interesting character in his own right, but I find that the pastiche stories, comics, and pastiche novels don't quite get him right for the most part. And because one source of frustration I've found when it comes to the Fafamon bits of later stories is that I don't know if this sounds weird, but a lot of the pastiche writers, I feel like they're more fans of Fafamon than they are of Conan. And so they write Fafamon like he could just kill off Conan and even Zaltatun like with a snap of his fingers. It's just that he doesn't want to. And so he's this godlike entity, and you just kind of go, then what's the point of the story if Fafamon could just wink everyone out of existence? What are you doing writing this character like that? That is not the Fafamon of Howard's story. Yes, he's very clever, but he was also very, very foolish to have lost his ring and then to have ended up in the scenario he was in. And what they forget is that Fafamon was very much at one point, he was the power behind the throne of Stygia, but he was not openly the great power. He was not openly the political guy, like the ruler. Now, him being the great power in Stygia is true, but arguably in Hour of the Dragon, it stated that Zaltatun is a much greater force than Fafamon. Zaltatun could wipe him out with general ease. It's pretty much stated, I find, there's no force on the planet to match Zaltatun. This is repeatedly said. And in the Ablaze comics, apparently they name Zaltatun as the Dark Lord.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they give him that title. He's the Dark Lord. And I actually found that out from ZeroSum716, one of our other YouTube channels that we booktube and team up with for Conan stuff. And because I've not read a lot of the bande dessinée, even though I'm French, when it comes to Conan. I want to read them. I just haven't yet. But there's so much Conan to read before then. But to find out that he was titled the Dark Lord, and that the French try to make comparisons between him and Sauron makes sense. But Fafamon, I would argue, is more a Saruman figure. He's powerful, but he's not Morgoth or something, or Zaltatun. He's not Set. He's powerful, but he's not omnipotent or omniscient. But like in the Savage Sword of Conan, he's very obviously omniscient. And he knows everything. Like I've seen one comic where he just teleports in, zaps and kills a character, teleports out.
Right,
and
yeah.
He always knew everything that was going on. He could have killed Conan at any time. He just chose not to. And it was like, then what's the point of the narrative then what's the point of Conan? Like, I just found it a little insulting and annoying because it's like, if you just want to write Fafamon, go write a Fafamon story. Don't go including him in Conan. Like, write Conan. And where Conan could not figure his way out of a trap, Fafamon rescued him because he had a grudge with the enemy. And it's like Howard's able to do this in Phoenix on the Sword to an extent. He is able to do it, but he only does it the one time, really. He doesn't turn this into Fafamon's career or turn Fafamon into an omnipotent individual. So, I don't know. I'm sorry about the little Fafamon rant. I do love the character, but I think he's most interesting as someone who's clever and conniving, but not omniscient. And
yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I can see why in comics where the idea of the supervillain is so ingrained that they almost default to that, like, okay, Conan's got to have his version of Doctor Doom, or whoever that's like always going to be there, that they can always come in as like the big bad. But yeah, I can see. I think you're probably right. That isn't really in there in the original stories in the same way.
Yeah.
So let's do something to a light.
It's okay. Sorry about that. And then I think that what's most interesting about Thoth-Amon is that, well, for one thing, he's called Thoth by Howard at a few points. And he ends up doing something very interesting. As a slave without his ring, he's vulnerable. So he has to rely on his cunning. And I find that him not having this omniscient crystal ball, I think I've seen that in a Savage Sword story. That was really peculiar, that he's basically just going, I have my crystal ball and I could see and know everything with that. That was so bizarre. But the idea with this story, this Howardian story, is he doesn't know everything. So he relies on cunning, he relies on spying on others, and he weaves his own conspiracy. And this is way more interesting because he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's working with human-based knowledge of, like, I don't know, but I'm going to scheme and play chess with everyone else. So that he seems a much greater threat in a way. And, like,
it's one thing to have a villain with all this mighty,
basically Saltitone.
Yeah, powerful power of the gods type thing, but having nothing going on between his or her ears.
Oh, that's not Saltitone.
I know.
Yeah,
but to have a character that is far more clever, whom can be very, very limited in talent of magic, and yet understand how to use his or her magic better than a powerful archmage.
Yeah. Here, though, Thoth-Amon has a great understanding of magic, better than anyone else alive at the time. But my point is just, I like seeing him be clever and have to outsmart everyone. And I think that's way more dangerous and way more interesting. So the trouble is that I think what you're getting onto is that in like the Marvel stories, he has all this power, but they never have him strategize or think really. Whereas Howard preferred to have him be like an Odysseus-like figure, having constantly outfoxing people. But at the same time, there's something that I find that is very odd about modern writers. To write one character as really smart, they write other characters as really dumb. Generally, I can't understand this. Whereas what Howard does with Ascalante is that he doesn't make him stupid. Ascalante is brilliant, but so is Thoth-Amon. So like you have two very smart guys abusing each other and trying to come out on top, and it just makes the story so much more interesting because you don't know which one's going to come out on top. They're both ruthless and evil and bloodthirsty, and both of them have limits. Ascalante is very much a very good warrior, but on the other hand, Thoth-Amon has brilliance in magic.
There's a lot happening in terms of those layers of intrigue and the way the characters are sort of competing with each other in what is still a very short story. I know it's longer than with this Saxo rule, but it's basically a short story. Everything's sketched in, and yet we can get this sense of the characters, the main characters, having these different kind of sort of yes, exactly. They're aiming for different end games. Things happen because I think Thoth-Amon's his aim isn't in this isn't really to do with Conan. It's to do with wiping out the conspirators who've enslaved him. So he summons the demon for that reason, and it has some unintentional side effects. Then there's the whole Epimetheus angle as well, which is quite fun.
Yeah. Well, just to close up this part of the Thoth-Amon thing before we move on to the other awesome characters, I find they're all awesome. I'm biased. I love Howard and his works, but I think with Thoth-Amon, it's like you said earlier. It's really Marvel writes him it's a superhero comic or something. And even some of the pastiche novels seem to do this, and I find it very weird. But on the other hand, this is where I don't like their depiction of Conan. They write him as a superhero who just happens to have Conan's name. They're not writing Conan, the Cimmerian. And this, now I'm going to do a bit of sacrilege. I don't really like the Roy Thomas run. Now, if people love him, love what you love, don't listen to me, as I always say. But on the other hand, there are some great Roy Thomas stories. Don't get me wrong. There are times when he taps the real Conan, and I love it when he does. But then there are times when he doesn't, and it's just like you look at the first issue of The Savage Sword of Conan. He really does tap the actual Conan there. That very much feels like Conan the Cimmerian. But one thing that Roy Thomas never did, and I found this might be a weird point of frustration, is the intro of Conan is like James Bond's intro. James Bond. With Conan, it's, I am Conan, a Cimmerian. He always introduces himself in the Howard stories that way. And there's a flourish to it. And, like, you get a sense of danger and awe from, and even the idea that, as Lewis would put it, he is good, but not safe. As Lewis describes Aslan. You could say that about Conan. He is good, but he's not safe. Because the idea of good back then was it's not something safe. They will do good and they'll help you, but at all cost. And there's going to be a lot of sorrow along the way. That's inevitable. But I think that with Conan, what we have is a character whom, after Howard, he's often written as someone like a superhero, just with Conan's name. Whereas how Howard perceived him was, now I can't speak for Howard, but I don't think Howard would have been impressed with that. I don't think it's faithful to how Howard envisioned Conan, or even Call. And I think that this weird superheroization, I don't know if that's a term, I don't think it is. It doesn't sound proper. It doesn't sound proper English. Thank God there's no English academy like the French Academy, l'Académie Française. Otherwise, they'd be coming over to crucify me, quite rightfully, or burn me alive at the stake, quite rightfully. I think that Conan is not supposed to be read as a superhero. And this is where I prefer the Dark Horse Conan run, because I feel that's much more Conan. Like, he's not a superhero. He's dangerous in there. And there's always that element of danger with Conan. But not to undermine that he's a good person. I think in the stories, he often struggles with good, but he does pull through. This is the idea of a lot of the stories. He's a good man. But he's much more like Lucius Vorenus from the Rome series. Have you seen it? The Rome?
I haven't actually, no, but I kind of get the sense of what you mean. But I think Vorenus, in the Phoenix on the Sword, what you're seeing is the danger emerging. But when the conspirators go to his bedroom, they're expecting to kill a king, but what they get is Conan, barbarian, wild, half armored, all of that. They get sheer might and savagery, so they just get the danger.
The lion,
and that's what I can see why Howard might have thought that the bedroom scene, as it were, the fight in the room, it's too good not to recycle, because that doesn't change too much from the Cole story, because it's fantastic and it has to be used. Except it's working in a more interesting context because you've got a supernatural threat as well.
Yeah, and I'm just looking through my notes. What I also like is, I just had one question before diving deeper into that fight. What do you think of the ring thing, like with Fafamon having his one ring? Like, I just think of Lord of the Rings and the Ring of the Nibelungen with that.
Yeah, it's a very potent symbol. Yeah. I think it's a bit it's clearly a narrative shortcut that it's just sitting there in the guy's chair waiting to be found. But you know, there's enough juice in this story to power a novel, and a writer of today would probably parlay it into a trilogy or something, you know. So I think you can forgive a little bit of that, you know. And maybe I was sort of thinking, if I had to rationalize that, why is the ring suddenly appearing in that at hand sort of thing? That does feel quite Tolkienian, almost as if it's found its way back to Thoth-Amon, and suddenly it's there and he can use it. But it's a very primal symbol, and the way it's described. Is it a snake eating its own tail, or it's certainly snakes, isn't it? So it's got that sort of that sort of element.
I think for now, yeah, there's the ring. It's also a potent symbol in, I think, Norse mythology, I believe. I'm not trying to always refer back to Norse. It's just Howard really liked that stuff. But as for the cutting up of stories into trilogies, some writers are really good at these trilogies, which feel I love. This might sound weird, but I do love fantasy trilogies. I do love that extended reading. But on the other hand, I do think the art of just writing one novel, like The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. I don't consider Lord of the Rings a trilogy. It's actually really one novel. That's how Tolkien intended it. Or Hour of the Dragon. This is a lost art, it seems, in this genre. And I think... now, I'm actually going to praise the Conan writers with their pastiches. At least they do a beginning, middle, and end. They don't do this trilogy thing. So,
yeah.
I think, like, I don't want people to think we just mindlessly hate them. It's just we're leveling criticism. But on the other hand, like, you look at the Call of the Conqueror pastiche novel / movie. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's just a rewrite. It's just a rewrite of, in a way, of By This Axe I Rule. Just it's with some Hour of the Dragon stuff thrown in, and it's a good story. It's not as good, but it's good. But yeah, like a single volume story is a lost art, it seems, as you've pointed out quite rightfully. I think I'm not trying to project your meaning onto anything. I just or put words in your mouth. I just mean, like, it. I think that's your point, and I actually quite like that.
It's like my rationale is that there are probably two primary reasons why trilogies and multiple books is something that writers now like to do. One, there's a capitalist mentality where they could milk
for money.
The other one might be there are more stories to tell. Like, there's beginning, middle, and end for various stories. For example, Lloyd Alexander's Prydain with Taran.
Well, yeah, but okay, that's more cut in the mold of a Celtic set of sagas, like what Conan is. Like, Prydain is a series of stories about the life of one character, Taran. And I think that that's taking more inspiration from Howard than it is Tolkien, for example. Although, because I would bet some serious money that Lloyd Alexander may have been reading more Howardian stuff than Tolkien stuff, and that has more to do with the fact of how he structured things.
He was an American, after all.
Yeah, and it doesn't get more American than Howard to an extent. I'd bet some money on that, but if I had any, but which in this economy in Canada, that's not saying much. For me, so no one has any money here. I hope people don't mind that joke. Oh, and there's also one quick line I want to also mention. I like how Conan, I think it's in chapter 4. No, it's, well, basically he explains at some point, it'd be in chapter 2, that Ronaldo's poems have ripped the heart out of his chest. So, like, in no other Conan story do we hear of Conan having this kind of relationship with another guy that
Mm.
like the person has charmed him in a way, like that Conan is just like, I can't harm this.
Mm.
Like the person has charmed him in a way, like that Conan is just like, I can't harm this person. What the heck? Sorry. But but actually, I'm going to turn off that phone. Sorry about that. I don't know why someone was calling. Let me see. No, wait, I can't. I have that. Oh, well, whatever. But yeah, like Conan is not someone who's easily charmed, and yet he's stricken in some way by awe for the music and poetry of Ronaldo, which just speaks to Ronaldo's skill. Arguably, he's probably a much better poet than Redondo, I think, was.
Yes, it's like he has a sort of bard-like status in the structure of the story.
And it's like Conan has been possessed or something. But on the other hand, then you've got Epimetheus, the sage, who has a very sacred feel to him and blesses Conan and warns him of the coming attack. So that you've got, I hope you don't mind me using the term, genuine deus ex machina, where you have divine assistance in the context of the story, telling Conan, beware.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I wonder if, now looking at the Conan stories as a series of narratives to an extent, leading the way towards Hour of the Dragon, I wonder if, to an extent, I hope you don't mind me kind of going off the beaten path here, I'm wondering if Mitra is still through Epimetheus, is still favoring Conan, and that by the Hour of the Dragon, and that this is maybe like Phoenix on the Sword is maybe Mitra wanting to keep Conan alive because there's danger down the road, further down the road to an extent of a greater darkness. And that maybe Conan has a greater destiny and the divine intends for him to come to the rescue, so to speak. And if Conan still, by Hour of the Dragon, has the blessings and favor of Mitra, I'm not trying to do this divine thing, but it's just Mitra is clearly an actual god in the context of this story.
Yeah.
Clearly an active force, just as Set is in some of those stories of Conan.
I think it's better if that's left as a vague possibility, because when you see it spelled out, as in I think the Conan of Aquilonia pastiche novel that's sort of 4 novellas, but it's a De Camp and Carter book where I think that's the one where it ends up with Mitra and Set like manifesting and fighting each other. That. And again, it's you're back to the kind of comic style supervillain stuff, so there they are, one's light, one's dark, duking it out. It just becomes too cut and dried, if it's sort of, I think the sort of magic in the Conan stories is fairly, it's very present, but it's not too codified. I can only think of 2 magic objects that Conan has. One's the sword with this one, the phoenix on the sword, where he doesn't really have much to do with it. And then there's the belt he wears in the one with the sort of Himalayan sorcerers. Is it People of the Black Circle? Yeah. He does don a magic belt at one point. But it's not like he's going to be throwing lightning bolts at people and doing.
When I suggested the Mitra thing is like an active force, I don't like the idea of like he's directly going to be throwing lightning bolts around. I prefer the idea of like the Tolkienian idea. Sorry, I'm not trying to always inject a Tolkienian here, but like the Eru Iluvatar kind of theory that where when Golem falls in the crack of doom down into the lava, there's the theory that Eru Iluvatar just kind of influenced, didn't outright just throw something, just lightly influenced things so that Golem would tear off a finger from Frodo and would fall off. Like he just like all but threw a small rock in there, and that like right below the foot of Golem, so to speak, not quite so blatantly, but like he influenced things so that Golem, if Golem gave into his greed, he would fall off and die with the ring. And that's what I meant. Like maybe to an extent, where let's say Mitra is influencing things, it's like so Conan is, like knocked out at one point hour, the dragon is washing away. Well, he is found and picked up. That's maybe the influence of Mitra helping him out so that he would be found. It's more a light touch, and where it's just influencing it that he would be found. Now he's found by the wrong people, but that allows Conan to survive and to then meet up with his own friends. What are the odds he would run into his Black Corsairs? Well, the odds are, and that's where I just looked at as maybe Mitra kind of just pushing and influencing so that the Black Corsairs were on the same ship Conan was found on, what was brought onto, so that this is a bit of a divine influence within the narrative. That's at most. I prefer that kind of idea where it's vague and like in the background. I don't want it in the foreground. The divine should never be in the foreground.
I totally agree with that, and I think it's quite deftly done in actual Howard. And if people succumb to the temptation to have gods appearing, even worse when it's Crom who's meant to be indifferent, if you suddenly see Crom face to face, it just doesn't really work. But yes, like you'd have the working of fate in Shakespeare, for instance, where
that's exactly
it's in how the stories work. I suppose it's in Greek mythology where things are a bit more personified.
Yeah, now if people want to say like I don't like the idea of Mitra being not a puppeteer but like influencing things, like being a conductor, that's fine. Like if it's basically the idea of life is random and the narrative is just following that, that's fine. I get it. There are times when that's more interesting. It's just I like to read it in a different style each time. But as for when the assassination comes about, like it's interesting that each of these assassins has a different motive. For example, I believe it's Grommel who was hoping for a higher promotion and didn't get it. And how Conan just kind of sees him coming and goes, and he's like, what is it? Volmana, I'll know that dwarf in hell. Like he comments that. And he tries to spare Ronaldo, saying, back, I would not slay you. Now, in terms of atmosphere, I always read the call line more like, I'm giving you one chance, Redondo, don't push it. Whereas with Conan, there's genuine panic, like, Ronaldo, I don't want to kill you, stay back. But the difference I find is that Ronaldo's far crazier. I hope you don't mind me saying that. He goes nuts and just throws himself in there when he's being told. Like it's just that line, he has ripped the heart out of my chest. I find that influences how I read Conan as he genuinely likes Ronaldo. And he does not want to hurt him. But the trouble is Ronaldo's half crazed with hate. And
yeah, I would totally read a Ronaldo prequel novel.
Isn't there
probably in preference to yet another Conan novel,
Yeah. Then again, I'd read well, I'll say that at the end, a Valyria novel, probably.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's actually a semi-Valyria pastiche called Blood of the Serpents that recently came out.
Yeah, I thought it was quite good. I mean, it's it's not the real Conan and all of that stuff, but it's well written. And
yeah.
but I do rather hate the fact that takes you to the very beginning of Red Nails, and there's another pastiche novel that follows on directly from the end of Red Nails. It's just like you say, every second of life is being strip mined for yet more pastiche stuff.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a sequel to Red Nails pastiche. I'm going to be honest. I'm such a fan of Valyria as a character. I might just want to find it and pick it up.
Well, I know. Yeah. That's always the temptation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just this one. This one might be the good one.
Yeah. There's hope springs eternal, and it rarely ever turns out to reward with someone prestigious. Oh man. I certainly hope they don't kill off Valyria or something. I like her.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't think I finished it.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of running through tunnels.
Not more tunnels. Have them out on a pirate ship or or something. Why tunnels? They already did that in Red Nails. Don't repeat it. I know that's a weird complaint, but anyways, I've got my own thoughts on Valyria, which could almost be formed into its own video, but not least because she's tied with Zenobia as my favorite female Howard character. But that said, Ascalante goes to make an attack after using his other. Like, what I like is that Ascalante actually uses his other conspirators almost like, all right, you go first. All right, he doesn't care about them. He's just using them to chip away at Conan till Conan's in enough of a weakened state that he can make a jump at him himself. And I actually really like that. It shows the cunning of Ascalante. He's like, I can't quite match Conan, but what I can do is use my fellow conspirators like, pawns.
Yeah.
For
That does feel quite Shakespearean as well. You could imagine that's what Richard III would do.
Oh yeah.
Use the others through persuasion.
Yeah, the son of York definitely would do that. I love Richard III, so I'm very, very happy that you made that reference. But I think what's interesting is how Fafamon inadvertently saves Conan this one time, and kind of indirectly with his demon, and how, in a way, I'm actually going to propose something a little weird. In a way, Ascalante seems to be the main character of this story. In a way, what I mean is, it's really his actions, like a Greek tragedy, where he set up this conspiracy to dethrone I'll argue, the rightful king archetype, or king of Aquilonia. And he set it up perfectly. But the thing is, he's abused Fafamon so that Fafamon betrays him, so that in the end, it's Ascalante's own actions coming back to bite him at the end, so that it's like the beginning, middle, and end for him. And on this recent read through, what I wondered was, what if Ascalante had used his cunning and his strength for good? What if he had actually used it to benefit others rather than himself? Would he have already become a king or something? Imagine what he could have accomplished. Clearly, if he had actually done something right by Aquilonia, Conan would have probably taken him on and given him rank and privilege and favor. And yet he uses, I hope people don't mind the term, but his God-given gifts and talents just to undermine others, which ultimately undermines himself. Not trying to read that into the story, but it's just, I noticed that in this read through.
Yeah, totally agree. And were it to be expanded into a novel, you could have a whole load more of Ascalante stuff.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that hinterland, that's the skill of it being a short story, that there doesn't need to be all of that on the page or all of that explained. You can sort of understand where he's coming from what Howard's set down.
very much. So, and his death is very horrifying, but on the other hand, very deserved. Given, like I said, I just find there's that Shakespearean tragedy. If he had, I don't like. If he had treated Fafamon with kindness, maybe yes, Fafamon certainly would have betrayed him, because Fafamon is that sort of individual. But on the other hand, a part of you might think he might have not have betrayed Escalante this time. It might have been further down the road.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he insisted on physically beating and mistreating Fafamon, so that Fafamon chose this moment to betray him at the first chance he could. So it's really Escalante's own cruelty being his own undoing. And that said, I do love how the priest, and like the nobles are all like, hark how he names Epimetheus dead for 1,500 years. They whispered to each other. The nobles are like, oh, he's nuts. But then you have when Conan says, no, like he starts describing where he's been in his dreams. You have the high priest of Mitra going, in Mitra's name, Lord King, be silent. And you have Conan, am I slave to shut my mouth at your command? Nay, my lord, I meant no offense. My lord, this is beyond a matter beyond human understanding. Only the inner circle of the priestcraft know of the black stone corridor carved in the black heart of Mount Golamira by unknown hands, or of the phoenix-guarded tomb where Epimetheus was laid to rest 1,500 years ago. And since that time, no living man has entered it, for his chosen priests, after placing the sage in the crypt, blocked up the outer entrance of the corridor so that no man could find it. And today, not even the high priests know where it is. Only by word of mouth do they know the. Yeah, but you just have and basically only the inner circle of Mitra's acolytes know where the resting place is, and it is one of the great mysteries of their cult. And Conan was basically spilling the beans about it all. And that's when the priests go, well, okay, stop. You're spelling all the great religious mysteries that are actually the entire idea behind our cult. So stop. We believe you. We'll vouch for you. And they do. But what's interesting about that is that I think Aquilonia would have probably ejected Conan for the whole slaying of Ronaldo, because of how popular Ronaldo is, if there was not this divine element in this sense. Conan has gone from a king who is at odds with the most popular poet of the kingdom to now a divinely ordained king, in a way. Like the priesthood has gone from, I don't want to say neutral, but like I don't know what their position was before, to now openly on his side and saying, no, guys, wait, he's got the favor of Mitra, the state religion. We have to side with him because clearly Mitra, the god, has helped him. Epimetheus, the messiah of Mitra, came to him in a vision. We have to side with him. He's divinely ordained. And that gives Conan, like in terms of his kingship, that gives him a lot of
credibility.
Yeah, like a lot of legitimacy.
Yeah. So I suppose in the mechanics of the story, that replaces the breaking of the tablets of the law. So instead of the law, you get he's penetrated the mystery of religion and kind of brought that back. And I mean, that would almost, I wouldn't want to put too much into this, but that would almost support the Old Testament, New Testament idea. Because in this you've got that element of, if Golamira as a name has echoes of Golgotha, then you begin to get a sort of resonance with like Christian mythology, I suppose.
There's layers to Howard's writing. There's a lot of layers to it, like you said.
Yeah, and it's just there. You can take it or leave it. But certainly, because I had been thinking, it's a shame that the tablets of the law parts disappeared from the story. But you sort of get this instead. It's a lot subtler, and sort of works really well. Listen, dudes, I'm going to have
I
to
would-
wrap up in a bit. So,
Okay, we'll wrap it
sorry,
up soon.
sorry to bail, but
No, don't
That's
apologize.
fine.
We've taken up too much of your time. And all I was going to say about the idea of Valyria that I had was, I always thought that I always kind of wondered, at most what I'd want is an interquel pastiche of what is Valyria, like injecting Valyria kind of into Hour of the Dragon. Not rewriting Hour, but because Conan references in Hour, I don't have any sons. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have kids, because he obviously has a seraglio full of lovers, as referenced in, I think, the Scarlet Citadel, I think it was. I know one of the Howard stories references he's got a lot of women in his seraglio. And that's what he's wanting to come to the rescue of. But it's referenced directly that he doesn't have any sons. So I just always wondered, does he have daughters? And that's where I wondered, given Valyria would probably not be the sort to let him out of her sight because what she's like. And I just wondered if she was in that seraglio. And yeah, that was a thought I had. Like, they could always title it like The Daughters of Valyria or something. And like, that'd be something like, what would Conan's daughters be like? Well, they'd probably be, especially with Valyria, that'd be scary because they'd probably be the most violent, bloodthirsty maidens on the planet. And it would be funny because can you imagine having a father-in-law like Conan? That'd be terrifying. But anyways, that was a thought.
yeah, I would read that definitely.
I would.
Definitely.
It may not have too much Conan, but it'd have, like, we'd get to understand his familial life. We'd get to understand Valyria a lot more. We'd see more Valyria. That's always awesome. And if it's in, like, you could have it set in the Basonian marches rather than, so that, while Conan's off hunting down the heart of Ahriman, you have Valyria maybe rallying another march or the Gunderman to his cause. I don't know, but there's a reason she does not appear. It's because Howard had not yet thought of her. So narratively, she's a point. But I just think if you're going to write any story at that point in Conan's life, you have to, like, oh, well, we'll write, like, Age of Conan, the video game, has her running around and she's like, yeah, I'm not going back to Conan, essentially. No, this is Valyria.
Right, yeah.
At the end of Red Nails, she says, I'm not letting you out of my sight for a second, Conan. She basically says, I'm yours and you are mine. You are never leaving my side. You either have to kill her, which I don't agree with, or she's in that seraglio. And I'd almost want to read a story of her in the seraglio and how she comes out on top as the lioness there, because she's not going to accept the other woman slapping her down. She's too much of a lion herself. But on the other hand, one would have to bear in mind Zenobia is the love of Conan's life.
Sure,
and,
yeah.
And there is that pride of place for Zenobia as the mother of Khan, the heir to Conan's throne. So you'd have to kind of put Valyria's second fiddle to Zenobia at some point, and I don't know how that could be done as a writer. So, but that's just my rambling. But anyways, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
Just another interesting detail from Phoenix on the Sword drafts. In an earlier draft, he specifically names Cthulhu, Sathogua, and Yog-Sothoth, as well as generalized Old Ones. So, obviously, I think it was a good thing, but he obviously was going to tie it in much more directly with Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith in terms of that mythology, and decided against it. And it's, I think it's much better that it just talks about nameless Old Ones rather than name checking specific entities from Lovecraft, because that would set a whole bunch of other you'd never hear the last of it, would you?
No.
if it put things that firmly into Cthulhu mythos, it would be too much. So that was another thing that was cut out. But it's interesting to know that was in the thought processes.
I don't mind some Lovecraft in Howard's mythology, but I also think This might sound weird, but it's for Lovecraft and I think it's Smith, to build their own mythology, not to just steal away Howard's in a way. Like, not that they did that, not that they ever had that thought. It was basically three best friends just saying, let's try to tie in our stories in some loose way together and build together I'm using this term loosely, but like a Texan mythology. And I don't have a problem with that, but I prefer that they do it loosely and a bit more vaguely, so that we readers have to do a bit more detective work, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I think that's fun. And it also makes it a kind of a weird tales. It's in a sort of weird tales universe as well, you know. So that's all good. Look, guys, I'm going to have to go though. So
all right,
it's been real.
So don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button for over at Roy Reads Anything and at the Brothers Hyborian, as though you were Conan and maybe Zenobia on their honeymoon, taking down their enemies.
That's the way to do it.
Yep.